Yeah, I'm going to Vegas, and I got a cruise next week.
Oh, well, there's worse places to go.
Yeah, it's not too hard to take. I'll probably be at Delmonico this time tomorrow night.
This episode will take no prisoners because no one is safe. Everyone's in for some real good information and maybe even a few body slams at the same time. We know a lot of you listen to this podcast, and if you do, please take a few minutes to write us a review on iTunes. Your reviews help us keep the #1 spot and help solidify us as the official podcast of bourbon. I know you've heard me say it on every podcast, and you're going to continue to keep hearing me say it, but Patreon is how we keep this show going, and your support is very much needed. If you haven't supported us yet, please visit patreon.com and consider becoming a monthly sponsor. As a token of our appreciation, we'll send you some cool stuff in return, like t-shirts and bourbon samples. That's patreon.com/bourbon pursuit to learn more about all the cool swag. Your sponsorship is what keeps this podcast going. Enjoy this week's episode. From their bar to yours, Chad and Sarah of the popular YouTube channel It's Bourbon Night bring you their favorite at-home old-fashioned mix with the new Elemental Elixir's Golden Hour Syrup. It's a custom-made syrup with notes of bold black tea, warm spices, and orange zest. All you need is your favorite whiskey and ice. No bitters needed. One bottle makes 16 drinks, so that's only $1 a cocktail before you add your own whiskey. They can also be enjoyed in other cocktails or spirits, mocktails, coffee, tea, and anything you can think of. It's crafted locally in Lexington, Kentucky, and you can get your bottle now at whiskeyambitions.com. Ed Bly and Rising Tide Spirits are back again with a new release of Old Stubborn Bourbon. And this release of Old Stubborn is a premium hand marriage of 10, 11, and 12-year cask strength, barely filtered pot still bourbon. It comes in at a staggering 123.8 proof, and the flavoring grain for this one, which the last one was wheated, but this time it's now rye. Rich, sweet, and bold with a long finish that's sure to be another eye-opener. You can order online at Sealbox or thebourbonconcierge.com, and you can even purchase in person at Revival Vintage Spirits, and even now with very few select stores in Kentucky. You can get it now while you can, but be sure to do it because it's not going to last long.
Play Whiskey Wednesday Round 11, the memory game. Until June 26, each week you can win one of our 12 incredible grand prizes. Select $2 at checkout, and if they match on drawing night, you'll win that bottle. Not a match? No worries. You still score a Weller 12-year. Every $5 ticket gives you 5 chances to win, including 4 weekly bonus prizes. Get your tickets now at give270.org. Charitable Gaming License ORG 0002703.
Always find what you love at Total Wine & More. With so many great bottles to choose from at the lowest price, it's easy to find your favorite Cabernet or a new single-barrel bourbon to try with some help from one of their friendly guides. And with every bottle comes the confidence of knowing you just found something amazing. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, find what you love and love what you find only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly and be 21. Do you ever pour yourself a bourbon, swirl it around, and then start struggling to come up with tasting notes? And perhaps you're also looking for a good Father's Day gift idea. Well, you can now solve both with a kit from Knows Your Bourbon. And unlike other nosing kits on the market, Knows Your Bourbon kits feature real ingredients for the most authentic aromas. You can smell real Tahitian vanilla bean instead of some synthetic aroma that's just made from chemicals. So head on over to knowsyourbourbon.com and enter code BP10 for 10% off your order. Welcome back to the episode of the Bourbon Pursuit Podcast. Just Kenny here tonight, and we are, I guess you could say, winding things down a little bit, but we're gonna have a fun one tonight. You know, this is somebody that has been around in the bourbon realm for I'd say quite a few years now, but it's always funny to see the remarks and retorts that come from everybody that talks about them, whether it's good or bad. And I think that to even be in this game now, you got to have pretty thick skin because everybody's got an opinion. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest because I'm very happy that we are the first podcast to actually have him on. There's not too many news outlets that have ever interviewed him. And the only people that ever talk about him are always in third person. So tonight we have the infamous Bourbon Truth. He's also known as Lloyd Christmas. You're not going to find out his real name. You're not going to have a picture of him or anything like that. Super anonymous. But if you've never heard of him, he runs a blog called thebourbontruth.tumblr.com. His tagline is "Don't drink the purple Kool-Aid that the crappy booze companies are feeding you." Louisville.com even touts him as the Howard Stern of bourbon. And it kind of shows a badge of honor if you get bashed by him at some point. So, Lloyd, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
So I hope I didn't talk your head up there too much.
No, it's good. I love to be hated and I hate to be loved sometimes.
I guess with this, I mean, it's kind of turning into a love-hate relationship between people that are getting into it, and then distilleries and everything like that, right?
I'm amazed every day. I keep seeing things that I just shake my head at.
So let's go ahead and kind of rewind a little bit. I guess let's kind of start off. What first got you into bourbon in general? Like, was it just something that you've been drinking for a long, long time, or is there something that kind of got you around to even just drinking it in the very beginning?
Well, two things probably happened in the mid '90s that I can recall put together, and had a very bad Scotch weekend and woke up with a head that hurt. Pretty sure I probably woke up over a toilet at the same time. And the next day after that happened, and went to the Seelbach and went to the bar and said, geez, I hear that this bourbon stuff is pretty good. You want to hear about it? And that's where it all started. At the
Seelbach. Can you remember like what that drink was that kind of got you moving towards that direction?
Well, what I'm about to tell you is the very thing that I tell people not to do, but it was Van Winkle. But that was back in the day when Van Winkle was no big deal and no one heard of it. You couldn't get it in most places because no one wanted to sell it because no one was buying it. For today, you can't get it.
Yeah, today it's a completely different story.
Yep.
So that was that was the mid '90s, you said, and then about what time did you start blogging?
I want to say it was probably around 5 to 7 years ago. When I just had enough. I was a couple of things that happened is I had a slight little run-in before Lloyd Christmas was born with the Van Winkles. Kind of set me off a little bit, and I just always left a sour taste in my mouth. And talking in one of the rooms back then, because there was only probably, I say back then, 5, 7 years ago, it wasn't that far ago, but in whiskey years, it was probably about 100 years ago. And we were talking, and the Van Winkles came up, and I think I made reference to the fact that Julian couldn't, work a still if it depended on his life. And somebody dare you speak poorly of the Van Winkles, and it kind of went from there. And I think in that conversation, the Bourbon Truth was born, and it all came out at that point. And found out that people didn't really want to hear about honesty, and they didn't really want to, the little voice in your head that the things that you don't want to say in whiskey or about whiskey that you wish you could say, and that's where it all happened.
So is that kind of what made you start blogging? Was that initial run-in with the Van Winkles?
I would say that was probably one of the things that always stuck in my craw and made it a sensitive subject, because it was probably my first truly negative experience within the industry and dealing with him. And I'll tell you what it was I had a sentimental bottle that I had drank with my dad when he was alive, and I had gone back to the Van Winkles about 4 or 5 times and said, geez, I'd really like to finish this bottle with you guys. It was an old Lawrenceburg Van Winkle, and I said, I'd really like to finish this bottle with you guys one day. I'm traveling into Louisville a couple of times a month. And over about the period of a year, it was always like, we're too busy. And this was a while ago. This is when you could still find the stuff on the shelves fairly easily. And they just didn't have the time of day. And that continues to this day, where they just have this layer of scum across their smiles. And they're, as I always say, they're the luckiest people alive, because they don't really have to do anything but sit there and be a Van Winkle. So that kind of set me off, and that stuck with me as probably one of my more negative stories at the time.
Okay, so we might touch back on the Van Winkles a little bit because it sounds like you've got some disdain for them, and it sounds like I know that it's one of those sore subjects that's just in the world that we have to deal with right now because everybody's either on the hunt for it or they've heard about it through social media or through even mainstream media, and they want to get their hands on it. But I think I want to kind of save that for a little bit.
Okay.
I kind of want to rewind back a little bit and kind of talk a little bit more just to kind of give folks an idea of what you do blog about because, you kind of already said, I kind of set it up for you. For anybody that doesn't know about the bourbontruth.tumblr.com, kind of tell them exactly what you do blog about.
Well, I blog about whatever comes to my mind usually. I could be sitting and reading a tweet and see something. I could read something in the newspaper. I can be at the store. I remember one day I was at the store and I was walking down one of the aisles and there was this pimply-faced 17-year-old kid that was stocking shelves. And some nice lady walked up and said, "Excuse me, I've got to buy a nice bottle of bourbon for my husband. He's got some friends coming over and he asked me to pick up a bottle of bourbon. I don't know anything about bourbon. Could you help me?" And I just stood and stared. I'm like, well, first of all, the kid's 17 years old. Second of all, not that if you're stocking shelves, you don't know about bourbon, but when you put those two things together, 17-year-old stocking shelves, chances are he's not going to know anything. And certainly that's what happened is he came off and he said, well, a lot of people buy this one because, this is the one that the shelf is always empty. So this one must be a good one. And she's like, okay, thank you. And I just looked and shook my head and that became a story. So sometimes that's how they're born. Sometimes it's something that pisses me off. Sometimes it's something that is a good thing. And if people do read the blog, you'll notice that I do write about good things. I do compliment people. I do, you might say 100, it's sort of like they say it takes several years to attract a new customer and it takes seconds to lose them. I could be very friendly with a particular brand and get along pretty well with them and have a lot of positive things. But the first time you say something negative about it, well, forget everything good that you've ever said. Now you're an enemy. Now you've got a problem with the brand, so you must be a bad person. So that comes out in the blog, and I've changed also over the years. I've tempered myself a bit, believe it or not.
So I guess that's a good question to ask is that, in this age right now of the boom and everything happening, how important is it to have bloggers and authors out there that are giving unbiased and very truthful kind of statements out there? Because there's don't get me wrong, there's a lot of authors that write for the Whiskey Wash or Fred Minnick and all these other different people, and who knows where their biases either lie or they don't lie, and whether something's happening by giving free samples or whatever it is that kind of makes you change that bias.
How it all happens is a pretty disgusting business, unfortunately. You do have your people that struggle to be honest and forthright and represent what the responsibility that they may or may not think that they have to their audience. But a lot of people are out there for the wrong reasons. A lot of them are out there to get free whiskey. And I've been told by many of them that if I bash them, I'm not going to be getting anything anymore, or geez, I didn't like that ABC bourbon, so I can forget about them sending me anything from now on. And it's at the top of their heads. I don't care because I don't take anything for free. I don't take samples mailed to me. If samples offered to me by somebody or I'm at a whiskey event or something, sure, I'll drink it. But I'm not out there looking for samples, so I don't have to worry about where it's coming from. And that's not to say that a blogger is worried about those things. I'm saying that some of them are. And they often will write their reviews where it's sort of like one of the names that you just mentioned, a bad review of the person. You'll see things like, this would make an excellent mixer for a cocktail. That's code for this sucks. But they won't say, I don't recommend this, don't buy it. Now, there are some bloggers out there that will say that. I don't like this, and I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it, is that the true measure of a good whiskey is, would I buy a bottle of it? If you've already bought a bottle, would you buy a second bottle of it? So if I'm at a bar, I have a drink of it, and I leave that bar, did I write down the name of that whiskey? Am I going to go to a store and buy a bottle? If I take a sip of it at a tasting event, am I going to go buy my first bottle? If I've already bought a bottle or it was gifted to me, am I going to go buy a second bottle? I mean, that's where it's at, plain and simple. And if you wouldn't buy a bottle or buy a second bottle, then you don't like it. It can't get any simpler than that.
Yeah, if it tastes good, it tastes good. If it tastes like shit, it tastes like shit, right?
Yep, exactly.
Call a spade a spade.
Yep.
So I want to move on a little bit, and this will probably start diving into the truth, I guess you could say. So there's always a lot of talk about distilleries and sales tactics, marketing tactics, what have you. What are the ones, in your opinion, that kind of stand out the most, and why, for being, duping customers or anything like that?
Well, I'll twist that around for a second and then circle back around to your question. I understand they need to sell their product. I mean, they've got it's on the shelf. There's people that are being paid to do whatever it is. As a matter of fact, there's some people, there's some writers that you wouldn't think that are being paid to write copy for bourbon brands and for whiskey brands, but they're out there. Some people that are actually well respected. So you have to write copy. You have to write something that's going to make people want it. It could be something that's on the label. It could be a neck tag. It could be whatever. I understand that part of it, but when you start getting into embellishment and you start getting into all of the crap that's going on out there right now, it gets old. I mean, if I see one more comment, I'll take this for an example. Most people, they see that it's farm to glass, meaning they have their own farm or they're growing their own crop or whatever. Mm-hmm. Surface, that seems like it's something kind of cool and special. The problem is so Whistle Pig, for instance, they say that they're doing it. They're growing their own rye, but they're growing a very small percentage of their rye just so that they can say that. They're not saying the truth. They're not saying that because we grow 5% of our rye. But they're not going to say that. They're not going to come out and do that. They're going to say we're special because we're farm to glass. Well, everybody's farm to glass. If you're using wheat and you're using barley and you're using rye and you're using corn, then have a farm somewhere along the way.
Right. You're missing only 95% of the other pieces there, right?
Exactly. So it's all farm to glass. Now, if I'm growing it in the back, do you want that farm that you have, that you're stuck with, that you've now spent possibly several years getting ready for it to start producing? Now, all of a sudden, you've got your corn crop and you find out that your corn crop's maybe not that good. Maybe the moisture quality of it's not that good. Maybe it's shriveled up. Maybe you're in the middle of a drought and the sugar content isn't quite what it is. Now, what's the first thing that you're going to do? You're going to go to where it's consistent. You're going to go back to the buyers. You're going to buy up corn. You're going to buy up wheat. You're going to buy up rye. You're going to buy it because now I can buy the consistency. Because when those trucks roll in, they test every single batch. They bring it to a lab. They test every single batch. They look for foreign bodies. They look for infestation. They look for moisture content, sugar content. They look for all kinds of things. You can't do that when you've got your corn growing in your backyard of your distillery. Now you're stuck with it if, in fact, you're being truthful and you're being farmed to glass. So one of two things happens at that point. You're either using an inferior product, so you could say I'm farm to glass, or you're using a product that at best is probably equal to what you could be buying it on the open market for from a quality place that's out there. So farm to glass really isn't that important but that's a big hot topic now, farm to glass. So it must be special. I still need to send my corn out to be milled. I still need to have things dried. You still need to do all those things with it. So in the case of Whistle Pig, I believe, I'm not sure if their distillery is cranking them 100% or not at this point, but they were sending their rye to MGPI to be distilled. Mm-hmm. So, the amount of time it takes me to ship my rye from Vermont down to outside of Cincinnati, I could probably buy fresher stuff, that's a 2-hour truck ride away. So if it's a matter of freshness, that's not really true either. So that's one thing that bothers me is the whole, farm to glass movement. it sounds good, but when you really break it down and you know what you're talking about, it's not so good anymore.
Because no one should really end up being the Walmart of bourbon, if you will, or Walmart of whiskeys, where you just kind of have everything under one roof.
It's true. I mean, if it was so special, you would have your huge places. I mean, why wouldn't Maker's Mark be growing their own wheat? If it was that much of a special thing, they're not doing it because they know they can do better on their own. Jim Rutledge used to talk about grain sourcing a lot, and he still does when you get a chance to sit down with him, and he'll sit there and talk your ear off about grain sourcing and how it's important and GMO and all of these different things. But before you even cross his mind that they would grow their own corn, he would never even consider it. He's one of the most respected people, knowledgeable people out there. And if that's the case, you've got other people out there that don't share that opinion. So if they're growing it themselves, at most likely it's more expensive. So this is, anyway you turn, it becomes a marketing issue. That's one of the things that's current right now, that you have marketing. Another one that burns me pretty good is, I don't know if you remember when they dropped the age statements of the Barton and the Old Charter, and they continued.
This is probably 2-3 years ago, right?
Yeah, about that. And even they got sued for this, but they left the 6 and the 8 on their bottles. And Fred Minnick, I know, interviewed Buffalo Trace or Sazerac, whatever you want to call them, and interviewed them and said, why don't you change it? And they never really gave him an answer. And if you're not trying to fool people, you're not trying to pull the wool over their eyes, then why leave a 6 and the 8 on the bottle when it has nothing to do with it? Mm-hmm. And they're probably one of the worst ones out there. I mean, it's one thing after the other of them trying to take advantage of people and try to fool them.
So I think we should harp on that a little bit more. Just a little bit of side note. It's always funny to see people trying to sell their 8 and 10-year-old Old Charters and call them Dusties when they were just like off the shelves 2 or 3 years ago, right? But
yeah.
So let's talk about Buffalo Trace just a little bit more. Like, what else is happening behind there? Because I know you're not alone in this, because a lot of people, you could have the labels that come from Buffalo Trace. There's a lot of rumors that have come from Buffalo Trace that say they cut back, I could say, allocation, or being able to like push out bottles just because they want to make more of a scene in the market that looks like there's not enough to be had. Because I mean, if you think about it, Thomas H. Handy, for the BTAC line, like there's only a couple thousand bottles that go out every single year. Yet all that is just barrel-proof baby Saz, and they have the opportunity to put out like 15,000 bottles of it if they really wanted to, but they do that in a way to just keep driving demand. So what are the things about Buffalo Trace kind of still get underneath your skin?
I'll give you an example. I'll give you a very strong hypothetical. You can decide how close to reality it is or not. But let's just say that I was gifted with a letter that had all of the allocation models for a very large city's allocation schedule. So if you buy 200 cases of Reign vodka, you get 6 bottles of Pappy. If you buy something else or whatever, this was laid out in a very methodical format where everybody saw it and knew what the rules of the game were. So if you're going to play this game and you wanted to get your Pappy at the end of the year, you knew that during the year I needed to buy X amount of these products. I needed to buy X amount of fire and the whatever, Fireball, whatever they call their cinnamon stuff. Mm-hmm. You know what the rules are up front, and they claim that that's not true and that they don't do that. But hypothetically, what if they did do it? What if that is how it happens? Now, people will say, well, they can't control what a distributor does. They can't control what a salesman does that's in a store. But plain truth is that they get complaints all the time. Certainly check up on people, and you can certainly, it doesn't get done. It doesn't get done in the industry at all, because there's other companies that do allocations and that are very clever with their allocations. So let's just say, like I said, hypothetically, this sheet existed and they knew about it, and they knew that it was being done, that would make them awfully sleazy in my mind. So it's things like that, brands that go into my opinions of them. I think that the way that they're doing their barrel program right now is awfully sleazy. Some people have to log on once a year or several times a year and find out if you hit it just right. It feels like you're buying an iPhone when they're released at 1:30 in the morning when the allocations drop. You can get yourself a private barrel, but then all of a sudden you see a store down the street, he's got 4 private barrels that are coming in, and he never signed on to anything. He never had to wait in line. He never had to worry about it. He was able to get his private barrels. So why is it that some poor schmuck that just opened a store and is struggling to stick around, or a bar that wants private barrels and other ones can't? Now, in the private barrel program, everybody's got a different way, but it's the only one that I know of that
kind of goes with, you scratch, or you've been rubbing my back forever. Like I'll continue to rub yours. And
Yep, exactly. I mean, Four Roses has an interesting program because they've shut their program off to anybody that wasn't doing it before, but that's a whole different story. That's for a whole different reason. But Buffalo Trace,
and they're being transparent, right? I guess transparency is a big thing with this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, being honest about it and upfront about it. And is it tough to sit there and tell somebody, geez, I can't give you one because where were you 3 years ago? Yeah, it's tough love, but that's the breaks, and it's the truth. Because there was, I remember that the very first people that bought private barrels of Van Winkle, back when they were doing private barrels of it, some of those people remain friends to this day, but there's some people that just got kicked to the curb at the same time. I'm not sure about how that's loyalty, but it's not. So I could do an entire podcast with you just on the things that piss me off with Buffalo Trace. Things like the experimental warehouse. I mean,
I guess that's interesting. I kind of want to know about that because, Buffalo Trace, they call out the experimental warehouse. We've got these roofs that they open and they close, and we're going to try to redo the tornado, the warehouse C stuff, and fabricate it again. So I guess kind of talk a little bit about what pisses you off about, warehouse X or whatever they want to call it.
Okay. There's practically no testing that they've done in there that hasn't been tried and tested 50 times before in other situations. I mean, there's not too much novel and new that's out there that you have to discover some miraculous thing that's like, oh my God, if we use the bottom part of a tree and it's growing in the north side, tight grain on it, it's going to make better barrels and better whiskey if we use that. Well, yeah. Why don't you go over and ask Independent Stave that? They would have told you that 10 years before you started your stupid program.
There's also an economies of scale problem there too.
Yeah, and they're that what a lot of when you look at Single Oak was all done at the same exact time, and they were all finished, and they were all pulled and bottled at the same exact time. So they knew before Single Oak was even released which ones were going to be the winners. Mm-hmm. It wasn't any rocket science. They're not waiting 7 years to develop the Single Oak winner. If barrel number 110 was the winner, well, when they taste through them and they go, oh, wow, this is just phenomenal stuff. We just love this. This is just to have the Single Oak. The Single Oak barrel 110 is going to be the one. Well, now they're going to replicate it and start making it. So they get a 3-year head start on that process. And, they're coming out with the Single Oak edition. I don't know when they're coming out with it, but I'll bet you it's not going to be 7 years after the last one came out. So we'll see. It's just that I think that.
And I don't know about you, I never saw a bar graph that showed what the votes were, the tallies of anybody that did submit anything.
Nope.
Now that I think about it.
Nope, never saw it, never heard about it. It was always very vague and wishy-washy. There was I think they finally announced a few of the front runners as they were going, and then they announced a few of the finalists, and that was pretty much it. They didn't say what sucked the worst. And some of the experimental things that they're doing right now, some of those things are horrible. I mean, they put out I still know stores that have the oats and the rice experimental. This stuff sucked. I mean, it sucked about as badly as you can, and you can't keep a straight face when you say that wasn't a mistake of, that they put that stuff out. I had a conversation with a master distiller about experiment that they did with tequila barrels, and they never put them out because they sucked. And he pretty much kind of told me that they didn't put them out because they sucked. I think that if they had tequila barrels at, they'd put them out. They did the reverse. They put tequila out that was done in bourbon barrels. But there's other things too. Is they probably put up the biggest stink and the biggest fight with regarding people doing things with Van Winkle. But then they're just as guilty in the things that they do about Van Winkle. And one of the big problems out there right now is, how do I know that it's not counterfeit? How do I know that it's not a refill? For a quarter a bottle, they can put anti-counterfeit things on their bottles, and they don't. Why not? Why don't, do they not care? Well, there's really no other way to think about it.
Because, I mean, all that exists in the wine and Scotch world, but you don't hear about it in the bourbon world at all. Right.
And, I've been to, go to your favorite place that seems to have cheap happy, and they always seem to have it. And take when bartender's not looking, I ask them to see the bottle, and at a certain, if there's an O in the word volume, or, at the bottom where it tells you the proof, put a little dot inside of that O. A month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, ask them to see that bottle again and see if it's the same bottle. I've done it before, and they're the same bottle. I mean, there's places that have been serving Pappy out of the same bottle for 3-4 years. And not something that they're hiding. There's no other excuse, no other thing that no other reason you can come up with except they're screwing you over. So there's a lot of things, they obviously can't control something like that, but they can certainly control counterfeits a hell of a lot better. They can control a lot of things if they were going to clean up their act and do a decent job. And some people are smart and they start to clean up their act. I mean, even Michter's, believe it or not, one of my most hated brands is starting to clean up their act a little bit. And I'm starting to gain little teeny bits of respect back from them because they've dropped some of the stupid crap that they were doing.
I guess expand on that a little bit. Like what made you hate them either in the beginning or in what's kind of buying you back either more as a customer or just being more interested in them in general?
Well, if you go back to 1753, you get, I think it's Shank's Farm, and the story about the farmer, and he started making whiskey. I think it might have been rye whiskey or whatever whiskey it was that he was making. And then Shank's eventually grew, and it became other things, and it became Baumburgers, and then they changed the name to Michter's. They want to say that they were Shank's, that they went back that far, that they had something to do with it, and they didn't. They had nothing to do with it. And as a matter of fact, their whole legend that they sat on for the longest time about George Washington gave his troops Michter's. So this must be good. If this is good enough for George, this is good enough for you. They based that on a collector society coin. So I believe it was something like the Lancaster Coin Collector Society that commissioned 100 of these coins to be made. And it had something with the historical significance of the area and the whiskey. And there was no historical basis that anybody could find other than that coin that George Washington ever drank Michter's. Although Michter's didn't start into the 50s, and George Washington was dead for close to 200 years by the time that ever happened. But if you want to go back and look at, you can't find a time when they can say, oh, George Washington was drinking this. Oddly enough, Laird's does have paperwork, does have purchase orders with George Washington's signature that they did order Laird's for, Applejack for So there are people out there that have the proof that George Washington drank the whiskey, but Michter's isn't one of them, or whatever you want to call him, Chatham.
Maybe they just couldn't find it in Martha's diary or something.
They couldn't find it. They used the coin. They even acknowledged that they used the coin. So they essentially took the historical story and they just ran with it. They ran with it. It beat it, to an inch of its life. And they kept doing that. And it was significantly bad, and it started to get better once they came out with their own distillery. So once they had their own distillery, they could drop all the bullshit. They didn't have to deal with Willie Pratt anymore. Willie Pratt wasn't really good for anything but, people laughing at. And so he kind of went away, and he was no longer their master distiller, and they opened up their own distillery, and they kind of slowly started to get away from Mania thing and say, well, we've got our own distillery now. We've got very good people making our whiskey. So they didn't have the need at that point to do as much of it. So they started to change, because they didn't need to keep, the old dog and pony show going. The other thing that, not necessarily Michter's, but I know Whistle Pig did it. They initially put in that their whiskey was from the United States when they filed. They had it listed as domestic when it was Canadian. And they got caught, and they had to pull their TTB application, and they had to resubmit it with the proper information on it. You've got other companies. As a matter of fact, there's a bourbon that's out there right now. The only reason I'm not giving you the name is because I'm actually on good terms with the company.
Okay.
And they're good people. They have not done everything by the book, but they're good people, and I'm never looking to mess with people that are good people. And they filed their application for their bourbon, and because it was a barrel finish bourbon, and the way that they were going about doing it, they actually wasn't their bourbon. I believe it was their rye. They had to file it under a different category. So it's listed as a spirit specialty, not rye. And it's listed with the formula. Now, I've got a TTB application that's got a formula and it's listed as a spirit specialty, which screams that it's not real, that they had to put an additive to it. And I believe that they can put up to 2.5% additive. So they can put a sweetener in it. They can put glycerin in it. They can do whatever they want. They can put artificial flavorings in it. They can put natural flavorings in it, different things when that's done. But when you walk into a liquor store, you're not looking at the TTB application. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the biggest problems is you're trusting people that they're not going to mess around. So if you look at something like barrel finishes, and I wrote a blog post about this probably about 3 years ago, you'll find that a bunch of people have their listing as a spirit specialty for their barrel finish, and you'll see a formula listed, and other ones when the formula is not listed because they didn't disclose that they had to put something in it to file as a formula, they got listed as a rye or a bourbon. But those things aren't transparent. You don't know that. So once you start to look and you start to poke, you start to go, I found out about this and I'm not happy. I trusted this brand, and now I found out that, they're screwing with me. They've been screwing with me for the last 3 or 4 years. You have people like Templeton Rye that was telling people that their rye was made in, Templeton, Iowa?
Yeah, it was handcrafted. I think was the handcrafted in Iowa, and I think they got slammed on a few things. And honestly, I think that's what kind of started a lot of this in the very beginning, and that's what went to a lot of news outlets was when the whole Templeton thing went down, because they got slammed because A, it wasn't handcrafted, and B, it was just coming from MGP, and that's kind of what almost put MGP on the map for a lot of people.
Yeah, it did, and it woke some people up, which is good because people are pretty sleepy. But, the thing that really gets me was when a brand just assumes that people are stupid enough and they go throwing things around. What's really interesting is how Diageo handles their orphan barrel and their, I think it's the Blade and Bow now. They even put from the Stitzelweller distillery.
I was really hoping you were going to start talking about Diageo. Please go.
Yeah, well, they've got their own distillery now, but they're still pulling the Stitzueller card. The amazing thing about it is if you took 100 average people at a whiskey bar and you asked them what a Stitzueller was, do you get 5 of them that know what Stitzueller is with any kind of accuracy?
Possibly. I have no idea. What do you think?
I would say 5 is probably a good number. And maybe if you ask the bartender, you might get 6, maybe. They're selling that as a plus. They're selling that as, look, this is from the Stitzueller distillery when it's not. But don't forget, Bulleit was from the Bulleit distillery for years and years and years until they had to change the label because they were getting in trouble because there was no Bulleit distillery. There is now, but there wasn't for 15 years when it said, made at the Bulleit distillery. When you start doing stuff like that, that's just, it's sleazy, it's disgusting, and they deserve what they get. If somebody wants to call them out and call them a bunch of, lying scumbags, well, guess what? If the shoe fits, wear it. And that's one of the things that gets me, that there's no reason to have to BS people out there. I mean, there's a little bit of embellishment that everybody does, but I think it was yesterday that there was a new label that SKU posted, and it was just this massive amount of words. There had to be 1,000 words on a back label about this brand, and it was like a poem or something. And it just makes you shake your head and go like, what are these people thinking? But the thing is that I didn't get halfway through it to read it all. But to me, from what I saw, they weren't lying. They were just really bad at marketing. No one's going to stand in a whiskey aisle and read through, this gibberish, because that's what it was. Like I said, it looked like it was some kind of a poem that somebody wrote.
So what do you think is doing, I guess if you compared the major players right here, if we said Diageo versus Luxco in regards of just sourcing and selling stuff as pure marketing, like who's doing it worst?
Diageo is fairly new to American whiskey. They've got Dickel, they've got Bulleit, but Buffalo Trace, I think, is probably the worst.
Okay, I'll take that. So, you want to move on a little bit, or you want to harp on anything else in there?
I'm sure I'm going to find stuff to harp on as we go.
Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. Shopify's point of sale is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. And with Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers in-line and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns, from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. And get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone. Transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's point-of-sale Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/bourbon, all lowercase, and go to shopify.com/bourbon to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/bourbon. If you're anything like me, then you can't get enough about bourbon. And that's why I'm a subscriber to Bourbon Plus magazine. Bourbon Plus is a quarterly publication that tells the stories from the heart of bourbon, the farmers who grow the grain, the distillers who labor over the process, and the people like you and me who raise their glasses to celebrate it all. Subscribe to Bourbon Plus magazine today at bourbonplus.com, that's PLUS.com, and use code PURSUIT at checkout for $5 off your subscription. I want to go back to this one thing, only because this is one thing that I think most people might find interesting, is that, I want to ask your truthful opinion, just about the Van Winkle piece again, only because, you have I don't want to say a rich history, but you have a history. And in your opinion, with the current stock that's coming out, that's just pure Buffalo Trace, like it's Stitzelweller's gone. It's not even blended Stitzelweller. It's just pure Buffalo Trace. Is there a reason to even buy it anymore?
First, I know Van Winkle history back to the 1800s. I mean, I studied it, read the book, read plenty of articles about them, their family history. I don't really have a problem with Van Winkle until Julian III and his son Ringo, which I fondly call Preston, his son, because, Ringo's the world's luckiest drummer and Preston's the world's luckiest son. So so that's why I refer to him as Ringo. I think most people get the humor, and if you want to call it humor. But so it's not really the Van Winkles. I mean, I respect what the Van Winkles have done. There was a great line that was used in, it was in the book. They were talking about rectifiers, and that he was speaking before this Daughters of the American Revolution. And it was talking about and how they were putting out junk and people were drinking it and going blind and just nasty stuff. And one of the ladies said, "Oh, geez, Mr. Julian, isn't it true that you were a rectifier at one point yourself?" And he came back and he said, "Ma'am," he goes, there's nothing cleaner than a reformed prostitute." And and it's great little stories like that that you love, and you love it. You could tell in those days, but it was the wild, wild west. Back 33 is when they opened up the Stitzelweller distillery, and they had to get themselves through Prohibition, and so it's not until after Julian II passes away, and Julian III, he's going to go out of business. I mean, he's going to lose the whole company. He's going to go back to selling shoes or whatever the hell it is that he was going to have to do in life, because he didn't want to have anything to do with whiskey until his father grabbed him and brought him back into it. I understand that part of their history. I understand that, what they do. I mean, people talk about Stitzelweller like, "Oh my God, Stitzelweller, it's just greatest stuff." Did you know that the well was polluted?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the well was polluted. So there's some stuff out there probably that's got, whatever kind of taint was in the water. And then after the well was polluted, they changed to city water. So people talk about, well, maybe it's the magic of the water. Well, if it's the magic of the water, it's the magic of the water that Bernheim was using, and Belmont and all the other distilleries that were open back then still. So they, Ed Foote, which was the last master distiller, I was at an event that he spoke at a couple of years ago at the Derby Museum, and he talked about the last and the final few years. And the interesting thing was, when Stitzelweller closed, they took moved them over to New Bernheim. New Bernheim opened in 92, 93, and they took them all and they moved over there. So when people start talking about some of this, Bernheim, they talk about pre-fire because Heaven Hill ended up buying Bernheim and it became the Heaven Hill distillery. But that whiskey that a lot of it ended up in we're selling for $4,000 or $5,000 right now, was this 93, 94 whiskey that Ed Foote and his crew that were over at Stitzelweller made. Mm-hmm. So if you're falling in love with Stitzelweller, then you got to fall in love with New Bernheim when it first opened. You're going to fall in love with that, then you got to fall in love with the stories that Maker's Mark, how supposedly Van Winkle and helping at Maker's Mark, and he was best friends with the Samuels, and he helped them and gave them the recipe and gave them their yeast, and then Maker's Mark came out. So then you got to fall in love with Maker's Mark. So if you know the history, it's pretty hard to still be chasing this Van Winkle dream that's out there. Is it good? Yeah, it's good whiskey. Is it that good that people should wait in line and camp out for 3 days? I guess if you're poor and you can sell that bottle for $500, then it's worth it.
Right. Nope, I got you.
That's who's doing it.
So the one you mentioned a few names right there about chasing after the names of if you follow the Van Winkle line, and you're not shy about talking about how you have a love affair with Willet. So kind of talk about what you do like about Willet in general, because I'm a fan myself. Maybe it's just the family crest or whatever it is, but I can't get enough of trying to acquire those bottles.
I got to be familiar with them back before, probably right about when they first started distilling, before anybody really wanted it or cared or were lining up. I got to know them pretty well, and I would say that I've gotten to make some friends over there as well through the time. We have conversations and we talk about certain things that I wouldn't repeat, but in some of the candor that they use, they would never do certain things, never sell things a certain way, never screw people over ways that other people are doing it, never fool people. They have you could say it's a kind of a snooty attitude, because it's like, we own us, we don't have to answer to anybody. We don't owe any money to anybody, so we can do whatever the hell we want to do. I look at that as a positive. They have not released any of their wheated whiskey yet because they don't think it's ready. So, but they can afford to do that. It's going on 5 years old right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've tasted it, and it's damn good, but it's probably not coming out until next year. It's not something that they feel that they're ready for yet. So I had some conversations with them that I know what goes on in their mind. I asked them one time, if somebody just pulled up a tractor trailer load full of money and dropped it off and said, "We want to buy your place, would you sell it?" And the answer was no. And I was pretty shocked. I was just like, they've got to be getting offers all of the time, because they're probably the rows of acquisitions that would want, anybody would grab them in 3 seconds. But their attitude is, our family makes whiskey. We're in the whiskey business. We wouldn't be in the whiskey business anymore. So, you got to love people like that. And, it's sort of the complete opposite of somebody that's out to try to screw you over and take your money, lying to you about things.
Right. Absolutely. So with that, I kind of want to move on a little bit, and it might fall in the same category, because you see Willet doing itself, but distillers are continuing to push the envelope of cost. Bottles are increasing in price, just in general, but that could just be the market taking effect. It could be, just inflation itself. But, limited editions that were once $50 2 to 3 years ago are creeping upwards of $300 or $350 at retail now. And Willet's no exception to this, of course, because of their latest price hikes inside of the gift shop, as well as their 20 plus years that are now $800 a bottle, when a year or two ago they were only $200. So what do you think
26-year-old?
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think?
Their 22-year-old, I think, is still around $300 or $400.
Gotcha. So, I mean, what do you think is like the long-term effect of all these price hikes that are happening? And because in the short term, it doesn't matter. Like, it's gonna sell if it's a limited edition bourbon. But what's the long-term effect you think it's gonna be?
I like to look at it like a car. You can have if you close your eyes and you sit in a car and somebody drives you to, I don't know, the grocery store, and then somebody drives you back, blindfolds you, drives you back from the grocery store. It turns out that you're in a $20,000 Chevy on your way there, and on the way back, you're in a $500,000 Rolls Royce. But you were blindfolded, and it didn't matter. But all those people that saw you knew what you were in, and what you had, and what you were driving in. And if you had the blindfold off, you'd be like, "Oh, wow, I'm taking a Rolls Royce back from the grocery store," when it really didn't matter when you were blindfolded. And the same thing is true with whiskey out there. It's drinkable art. It's drinkable, and you can't really do it that much. I mean, you can wear I guess a couple $100,000 watch. You can wear a whole bunch of jewels. You can, outfit your house and expensive Oriental rugs and whatever. But if you're, out of money, or maybe you have enough money, you buy a bottle of Pappy, your friend comes over and they're going to see Van Winkle. The thing that always cracks me up is the guy that's explaining to his friend what Van Winkle is and why it's so special. Because the guy doesn't know to begin with. And so he's got to convince his friend that this is special because it's special stuff. And he's got to convince him it's special. That friend, maybe he shakes him off, but maybe the next day he goes online and goes, oh, I got to get myself a bottle of Van Winkle now too. And then he's out looking for his Van Winkle. So I think it's status. It's, braggability. Like I said, a drinkable art. And you can't do that with much. It is not. The only other thing that I know of that you collect and you destroy it is wine. You can think of something else. Let me know.
No, I'm fresh out of ideas.
Okay, so it's strange in that way, and that's why a lot of people don't drink it anymore. They keep it sealed, and they're supposed to worship the bottle of whatever it is. And there's bottles out there that are not even 10 years old that you could get $10,000 or $15,000 for them tomorrow. That cost $70 to $100.
Mm-hmm.
That's staggering. I mean, that's like, oh my God, it's somebody that threw a couple cases of wax dip 19-year-old A.H. Hirsch in their basement. When I say 19, yes, there is a 19-year-old A.H. Hirsch. There wasn't many of them. I think there was about 400 cases. But there was a 19-year-old A.H. Hirsch. They happen to sell for a hell of a lot more money than the 20s because they're rarer. But that bottle is probably at least a $5,000 bottle, I would guess. Probably a $1,000 bottle. And it probably cost that person back in the 90s when they bought it, probably cost them less than $100. So I have 2 cases of 12 of each one, 24, do the math, of how much money you've got there on just regular old decent bourbon.
Sounds like we need to hang out soon.
I don't think I have any A.H. Hirsch open, but I got some other good. I got other good stuff. My open bottles are in the hundreds. So you'll have to stop by.
That sounds good to me. So I guess that kind of leads into the next question. I mean, what do you think of people like nowadays that are collecting bourbon? You talked about Van Winkles and people that have these pieces of art that sit on the shelf. And, you yourself, you're a collector, right? I mean, you said you've got 24 bottles of the 19-year A.H. Hirsch that is well valued at way more than it would be incredibly hard to even open up. So, I mean, what do you see a problem with people that are just more or less collecting nowadays than actually drinking?
Well, the drinkers hate the collectors. The collectors hate the people that give them a hard time. It's, what exactly is collecting? If I open a bottle up that is phenomenal, I guess the last thing that I can remember that this happened with was probably the Booker's 25th. I opened that up and I was like, oh my God, this is a bourbon I want to drink the rest of my life. So I've got to do something about it. And at that time, it was all over the place. And I wrote about it. I tweeted about it. I was telling people, you go out and get this stuff because you're not going to be able to get it in a few months and you're going to really hate yourself if you don't get as much of it as you can. So I went out and I ended up with, I think I got 30 bottles of it because I'm planning on drinking it the rest of my life. Now, am I collecting that? Or am I just a smart whiskey drinker?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to say. There's a lot of people that never will open their bottles and don't intend to open their bottles. Or it's like, it's me, $8,000. So you're going to wait for your, people always ask me like, what's your favorite bourbon? And I'm like, well, can't answer that question because it's got about 5 different answers depending on what the question really means. And let's just say that I had my prize $15,000 bottle that I hadn't opened, and the doctor came in and said, you've got one day to live. Am I going to open that sucker now at that point? I'm like, you're damn straight I'm going to open it. Because somebody else is probably going to open it, in 2 days if I don't open it and drink it. So there's times when people are going to open certain things, I think, but a lot of times they don't. And I've seen people that will buy the bottle, sell it. Somebody will buy it from them. They'll turn around and they'll sell it. All of a sudden, this thing's got a value of $4,000. Nobody's paying $5,000 for that bottle anymore. And people stop buying them. And now all of a sudden, this guy's sitting there with a $4,000 bottle and wondering what he's going to do with it because, geez, that's the mortgage payment, or that's the next mortgage payments for the next 2 or 3 months. I got to get rid of this bottle, and I'm stuck. So,
no, I'm with you on that.
So it's hard to say, what is collecting? Is collecting not collecting? Like I said, it's a lot like wine. But it's interesting. Nobody's got a problem with wine collectors. It's identical.
Right. And I mean, maybe it's because I don't know much about the wine world, but at least in the bourbon world, like, you've got a short 2-month window in the middle of fall where pretty much everything comes out, and it's up until, just you've got a very short window to be able to go and get as much as you can. And then you figure out what you're going to do for the next year. So who knows what these people are, whether they're collecting, they're just in it to be able to, as you say, pay their next mortgage or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, it's, and the crazy thing about it is a lot of people, they've been drinking for a year, and all of a sudden they're collecting hundreds of bottles of Pappy and George C. Stagg and William Rewellers and you name it. They're in it. I know for a fact several billionaires that have bought up a couple $100,000 collections instantly to have their collections, immediately. And they go down to their wine cellar, I guess, and they put all their bourbon bottles down there, and that's what they drink. Now the big thing in vogue is the private barrels. The private barrels have taken over a lot of the specialness because there's not that much special that's out there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because pretty much those are just the barrels that just didn't get selected, beforehand, or whether they've, been hyper aged. I would say hyper aged, but they've just been aged longer than anything else, right? And whether that flavor changes drastically over a year or two may or may not have a huge effect.
Yeah, I think it's more of the individuality of it. I mean, it's almost like if you had 5 children, each one's going to have their own personality. So, you might, in these barrels, I particularly like a great long finish, but you hardly ever get a great long finish. And you rarely ever get anything else that's bad with a great long finish. You either have it's good all the way through it, or it's not good all the way through it, and you don't get a great long finish. So that's what I'm looking for when I'm picking a private barrel. Unfortunately, there are less and less of them out there, and it's harder and harder to get in there to pick it. When you see people going into places like Castle and Key, and they're and I don't know what the hell they're doing, but they think that they're in there picking a barrel to be put away, but they're tasting new make or something that was new make 6 months ago. And they're picking that particular barrel and they're putting that barrel away. It's like, there's no way in the world, unless you're a super, super talented person with a super, super palate that has a super, super education to know exactly what it is that you're tasting, that you're going to be able to tell at that age.
I'm totally with you. It's funny that you say that. So the barrel buying group that I'm in actually has an excursion, I guess you'd say, next month to go and pick out a barrel at Castle and Key.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I read one of the articles that you wrote about that, and you were like, it's just going to taste like paint thinner. Like there's no way that you can guess what this bourbon's going to taste like in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and what it's going to be. So what's the point of even saving the barrel now, as you said in your article, except the fact that it just puts more money in Castle and Key's pocket to help keep funding a lot of their projects.
Or keeping the lights on.
Exactly.
They're making their money right now in that big warehouse where they're storing everybody else's whiskey. I mean, that's their money stream, and that money stream is only goes so far. So a $2,500 deposit or $2,500 a barrel, barrel whiskey costs $700 to make, approximately $500 to $700 to make it. When they turn around and they sell it for $2,500 years before it comes out, but what happens if they go out of business? I mean, if you look in history about people that lost fortunes because they had their barrels sold out from under them, I mean, you're not getting a stock certificate or some legal ownership of that barrel. I don't know exactly what they do, but you're not becoming a corporation and taking ownership of that barrel when that barrel is being done for you. You're hoping, keeping your fingers crossed, that in 8 years when it's supposedly ready, and that's ready with quotation marks, because when is it actually ready, that everything is going to still be the same. But what happens when some people think it's ready in 6 years and some people think it's ready in 8 years, and half the people no longer drink bourbon anymore and they want their money back, and it just gets awfully messy.
Or it could be bought by Diageo, and those all become orphan barrels.
That is true. They've got 12 rick houses or however many rick houses over there. That doesn't count.
So, following that Castle and Key thing, I know I've been holding you up for an hour here, and I kind of want to start wrapping this up, but I do want to ask one more question. When we're talking about Castle and Key as a prime example, because that is today. I mean, that would be considered craft whiskey. Because they don't necessarily have a bourbon on the market. If they do put a bourbon out, it could be something that might not be very good, because you still, the problem is that you have investors, they want to get their money back. So they got to put something on the market to be able to just start driving sales. Do you really think that craft whiskey stands a chance here in the next few years, whether they keep siphoning money or if they're just going to lose out to the big guys at the end of the day?
Well, they're over 800 now. Last number I saw was about 800 craft whiskey places. Probably one of the worst things to happen was those, when High West got bought up and all these places got bought up, and High West guy walked away with, I don't know, $100 million, $150 million after he probably, I'm sure he's had some investors he had to pay off, but he still walked away with, boatloads full of money. That
for doing nothing more than buying MGP whiskey too, right?
Mostly. I mean, he did have some of his own that he was mixing in, and some of his own younger stuff that wasn't very good. But yeah, that's what he did. He was buying MGPI, but he's a chemical engineer, and you know what? He knew how to make whiskey. And there's a lot of people that are doing craft that know how to make whiskey. I mean, they've apprenticed at the right places. They've done it for people. I mean, the Stolen Wolf, that were the ones that originally they were going to call themselves Bomberger, but Michter's sued them, and they ran into all kinds of legal trouble. So now they're called Stolen Wolf. Well, they're in the midst of finally getting the approvals for their construction. They're going to start building now. And Eric, which is the younger of the two, is the Wolf part, and the Stoll part is Dick Stoll, and he was the last master distiller at Michter's. And he has, 20, 25 years of distilling experience. So when they start making whiskey, this guy's going to already know how to make whiskey when it starts. But a lot of these people, they took the short course. They took the 5-day course in Louisville, and now they're master distillers, and they're out there using their retirement money and their college fund to fund their dream. That's when it's really bad. That's when you run for the hills. That's when you grab these people and you're like, don't do this. You're never going to find the place on the shelves. I was at one of my favorite liquor stores last week, and the owner came in and said, and I was having a cigar there and a couple glasses of new private barrel. And the owner came in and said, I've got a salesman coming in with a bag full of whiskey. You mind helping me out? And I was like, no, not a problem. I'll come and I'll help you out. And he takes out these 2 or 3 bottles from some craft place I've never heard of. And I said, are they making this themselves? And he goes, yeah, of course they are. And I'm like, well, how do you know? And he says, well, that's what I heard. And I was like, okay. I'm like, do you know when they started making it? And he goes, no. And I said, this isn't straight whiskey. I mean, if there's any word at all on a bottle of whiskey that somebody should be paying attention to, it should be the word straight. If it doesn't say straight on it, don't buy it. And why Kentucky straight bourbon is, 10 times better than something that isn't from Kentucky and it doesn't say straight and it's clear and it's going to taste nasty. So I said, this isn't even straight. He goes, yeah, I think it is straight. I'm like, it doesn't say it's straight. And he goes, yeah, but I think it is. I said, can you tell me what straight whiskey is? And he says, no, not really. So then how do you know that it's straight whiskey? Now, this is a guy that's trying to get a craft brand, if you want to call it a craft brand, because is it craft if it's not their whiskey? I don't know what that answer is, but I wouldn't, if I were making it, I wouldn't consider myself craft. I'd consider myself a rectifier, that I'm buying somebody else's whiskey and putting it in a bottle and shipping it off. So This is an example of, they got themselves a distributor and he's out there banging the pavement trying to get people to buy it. And the stuff was okay. There was a rye, it was a bourbon, but it tasted young. So it might have been theirs but on the other hand, MGPI is only selling young stuff right now. They're only selling like half-year-old. If they're even selling it to other people now. So, I tell people, and I've had people that have written me and said, I want to start a craft place up. What should I do? I'm like, don't do it. I mean,
it's the best advice you can give anybody right now, right?
Yeah. It's like, I want to buy a boat. You think that's a good idea? It's like, everybody that buys a boat says it's a bad idea. I want to buy a restaurant. Is that a good idea? You might be one of the lucky few if everything falls into place. I'll give you one more story. Catskill Distilling. I went up there just because the place intrigued me, and started talking to the owner, and he said, "I'm a lifelong veterinarian." I wrote about this too in my blog. He goes, I'm a lifelong veterinarian, and for some reason I got into distilling because I thought this would be a great place for retirement. And he goes, I didn't realize it was my retirement. So I stopped being a vet, and now I'm a distiller. He says, but the smartest thing I ever did was I befriended Lincoln Henderson. Every single thing I was doing wrong, and I would send him samples, and he would say, yep, you've got too much of this on there, too much of that. You gave this certain too much time. You did this with your still that was wrong. And unless you're spending big time money and you're getting a experienced master distiller to stand by you and be there and help you, there's only so many places that can afford that kind of money. Mm-hmm. So craft is dangerous, and it's dangerous to start. And I maybe have 2 or 3 craft places that I really think that they've got something good that I enjoy drinking a second bottle of, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because even this year we take a little turn, and we've had plenty of people that for the podcast they got a craft whiskey and they say we'd love to come on the podcast, and don't get me wrong, like every once in a while there might be a diamond in the rough, but for the most times we'll get a sample and we'll be like, this could use a few more years, or like don't age it in Florida anymore, or whatever it is. But we just kind of figured that those are always the ones that people didn't really care about because, it's not distributed in their part of the area, and their story is fictional or whatever it is. Right. So yeah, I can kind of understand that, because we definitely took a turn in the podcast where we kind of really went back and started focusing more along the lines of either the big ones and then doing a lot of stuff like this and getting to hear it from the front lines.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's good to have that kind of information out there. The people that are listening are amongst the few that care enough to spend their time to listen to it. I mean, hopefully that keeps going up and you keep getting more and more listeners. But let's face it, when I asked you about how many people would know what Stitzel-Weller was in an average bar, the average person's not listening to podcasts either, and they're getting screwed over because they're not.
Absolutely. Because there's just a label, and at some point it might have been Solera aged, which meant there was like maybe a 1 milliounce that was actually in there or whatever.
Well, I've heard that there are places that are messing with Stitzel-Weller to do that too, and we already know that one of them is our friends over at Diageo. So
look for that one.
Yeah, well, there's also you got to do is put one bottle in there, even though I think that there's a rule that says you're not allowed to take it out of the bottle and put it back. A.H. Hirsch, the last bottling of A.H. Hirsch, that became the famous humidor. All of those were in bottles. They dumped them all out, rebottled them. So,
I did not know that.
Yep, the humidor A.H. Hirsch was all bought back from stores. I believe it was all brought to. I know that Willett did part. Well, they were KBD at that point, but Willett did part of it, and then Buffalo Trace did part of it. But yeah, that all came out of older bottles and rebottled.
I didn't know that, because I did notice that the bottles did change, where they were kind of like this, like almost like bubbly glass instead of just the regular kind of clear glass. When they came out with the humidor.
Yeah, well, there's 2 that were from Frankfurt, and the ones, the last ones in the humidor from Frankfurt, those are the ones that got rebottled.
Interesting, man. You're a wealth of knowledge. We got to get you back on the show sometime.
Cool. Well, I'd be happy to come back on.
Well, good deal. So, Lloyd, even though that we're pretty sure that's not your real name, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show tonight. I want you to give a chance just to kind of plug your Twitter handle and your website one more time for people that want to learn more about you.
Well, Bourbon Truth is the handle on. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Tumblr. I think I even have the Bourbon Truth in one of those. I forgot which one, because it really doesn't matter to me. and people can jump on. I'd be happy to chat with them. I answer people's message that they send me. So yeah, I'd if you're not already following, follow.
Cool. And Matt Ralston asks, are you going to end up going on Facebook or anything, considering that's going to be the new medium everybody seems to go towards for bourbon knowledge?
As far as doing my own Facebook site, or as far as going live?
Oh, joining those groups and all that other kind of nonsense.
I'm in a group right now that we have some aficionados that take things pretty serious, and there's a lot of really good groups that are out there. But as far as I think I'm going to move off Tumblr. That's probably my next big effort. That's probably pretty much it.
Well, good deal. So I want to say thank you again for coming on the show tonight. It was a pleasure to kind of hear everything that's going to be off the cuff, and we'll definitely want to have you come on again, probably here in a few months or something like that, kind of circle back. And if there's anything else that you're itching to talk about to get off your chest, then, we're the place to be able to get you in front of a few thousand listeners. So if you like what you hear, make sure you support the show on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. Also follow us on all the social media channels at Bourbon Pursuit on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And with that, we will see you all next week.